People at work call me T, and I think it's nice and simple. So I think we'll keep it. What do you think? Hello folks, welcome to the Opera Cecilia channel. If this is your first video, we are an opera company started for and by emerging artists with the goal of taking opera to spaces it has not been to yet, in addition to carving out new space for opera in the industry. This is yours truly, T, typically found behind the camera or click-clacking away at the desk. There is a multitude of media out in the ether with music and singing that has not been fully explored yet, or at least hasn't been explored by us. For our very first installment of TenorVision, we will be reviewing and reacting to the colorful, diverse, and heart-wrenching Encanto. My wife and artistic director Taylor will be joining me for this one. If you have not seen the movie and wish to avoid spoilers, click pause on the video and get your eyes to the nearest Disney screen because, goodness gracious, what a movie. Today we're going to do something completely different. We're super excited to see where it's going to develop. Today we will be reacting to Encanto and giving a little bit of a review because we've seen this movie twice already. It was not very successful in theaters. It didn't quite bring in as much money as the studio would have wanted. But now that it's on Disney Plus, it's gotten this huge reception, and rightfully so, I believe.
What is so cool about this movie is not only does it talk about the complex system of family dynamics that so many people have experienced.
Yes, I would say what really makes this movie great is the fact that it is very much a family movie. Not just geared towards family where kids can also see it and enjoy it. It is a movie about family dynamics, and I think ultimately that's what makes it resonate so much with people. And to me personally, as a Latinx individual, I'm not Colombian, but there's so much overlap in the Latin American countries and the culture that I see myself very much a lot in this movie. So to me, it was very cool to hear the kind of music I grew up hearing. My family does have its roots in Mexico, and I definitely grew up hearing a lot of this kind of music, a lot of the same sounds and rhythms, because there's so much cross-cultural influence in the Latin Americas. So to me, it was really cool to see a tale about a family first and foremost, but through the lens of a Latinx experience. For me personally, I saw a lot of the Mexican immigrant experience in this.
I can't speak to that experience because my family didn't experience it ourselves, but there is a lot that plays with birth order theory and psychological birth order theory in this show as well, and I think those can be some universally relatable topics, especially for families that have trauma as a part of their lives in any way. And my family was hit with a significant trauma when I was younger, and it kind of rattled the roles that we felt like we played in the family for a time. And so there was a lot, especially with Louisa's character in particular, that I really, really deeply resonated with. And so I think that this is definitely a movie that covers a very wide breadth of different topics, and it's all really, really well reflected in the music. There's also beautiful cultural roots in the music, and we'll talk about some of the stuff that makes this movie so special and makes this music such hit music. We don't talk about Bruno just made it into the top 100, right? The Billboard Hot 100. Congrats!
I think you really said it really well in the sense that this movie does have elements of family trauma. A lot of people out there, perhaps our age, perhaps older, hopefully older, will see themselves reflected in this movie, and that's what we really want to talk about. I want to talk a little bit about Abuela and her role in the family. She is the matriarch. She is the one that everyone looks to, the one that everyone wants to please, and she makes it very clear that she is the kind of person that needs to be pleased.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, to a fault, I would say. Being the matriarch itself is not bad in and of itself. As human beings, we crave structure. We crave social interaction, and naturally some people are going to fall into a little bit of a leadership roles as times develop and as their individual temperaments are, and Abuela is very much the matriarch. and she's the kin keeper. She's the kind of person that wants to keep the family together and is very preoccupied with making sure that the family has an identity as a family.
And what's really interesting musically, from a musical standpoint, and this is sort of a film review, by the way, so we'll be talking character by character, and sometimes in chronological order, but maybe not technically in order of the story. Abuela is so interesting to me musically because she does not appear in a lot of songs. Mm-hmm. She is the matriarch, and so everybody else is kind of spinning their wheels around her. Everybody is kind of the cog in her machine, especially in the beginning and middle parts of the movie, not singing as much, and everybody else essentially doing all of that emotional labor for her makes a lot of sense. And then at the end, this is also a character that's very afraid of being vulnerable. As a musical device, these will often just be spoken characters for quite a while in the musical until that moment where their character creates an arc of vulnerability. And so we see Abuela actually sing a little bit at the end of the show in her most vulnerable moments. And that's a turning point for her as a character. But when do people in musicals tend to sing?
When they're overwhelmed with feelings.
Yeah, you're singing in a musical every single time that a character sings a full song in a musical. It tends to be when the characters are at their most emotional. So as a result of that, a character that is afraid of showing those emotions or afraid of being vulnerable or feels like they have to have everything in their control is going to be less likely to share their emotions in that way.
Speaking of being afraid to be vulnerable, let's talk a little bit about Louisa. And I don't want to go super in depth with Louisa because I actually do want to go more in depth into each song individually in separate videos. So once that starts going up, we'll put a link somewhere in the description or, up in the card.
We're going to bypass that for now in this video, but we're just going to talk a little bit about her as a character, and this could serve as a precursor to watching our reaction and analysis to Surface Pressure.
We are both oldest children.
Oh, gosh.
And Louisa is definitely, I would go as far to say, to be a textbook oldest child. She puts a lot of pressure on herself. I would say she puts more pressure on herself than other people put on her. Yes, there's a lot of pressure coming in from her, but I think she puts a lot of that pressure on herself as well and challenges herself to carry all that burden. And I think it's natural because there's a lot of expectations put on the first child.
I think one of the reasons that I related to this character and kind of teared up a little bit when I first heard her song was because when my family was going through a traumatic experience when I was like early, middle, high school, so I was a teenager when it happened. I had a parent that had to leave for a long period of time. I have a great relationship with both of my parents. For a while, one of my parents was separated from the rest of the family, and as a result of that, I took it upon myself to take on a role of basically being replacement parent for the period of time that person was gone. And nobody really told me to take on this role. It just sort of happened. I also thought that, if I didn't show my emotions and I kept all of my stuff bottled inside and I just presented as strong, then it would be easier for everybody else to get their needs met through me. And obviously this led to a lot of problems later on. And so, but I think it's kind of in a crisis situation or in a family that is slightly dysfunctional, and we do see that there is a lot of dysfunction in the Madrigal family, a lot of dysfunction that doesn't present itself on the surface. But that's exactly what Louisa's song is about. Louisa's song is about how under the surface things are starting to sort of crack. Louisa is literally in my opinion, the poster child for what oldest children often feel like they have to do in the family. They have to be the responsible one. They have to bear the emotional brunt for all of the other siblings. They're like secondary caretaker to the parents. I think it's also interesting how her entire self-worth is wrapped up in her strength. So when she feels like her strength is waning partway through the show, you see her completely emotionally buckle. And it's borderline comedic that she's like just straight up weeping at this point because it's such a contrast for the character. But it also is very indicative of exactly how an oldest person feels when they feel like their special talents or their caretaking abilities are taken away.
I want to talk a little bit about Isabella. Isabella puts another kind of pressure on herself, and I would argue that the pressure that Isabella feels is more external from other people than it is internal from her. Because she's always the one that's expected to make flowers. No one's ever asked her to make anything else.
She's not put under pressure to be strong. She's put under pressure to be soft, actually.
Yeah.
So she gets to be vulnerable and show emotions and things like that. But if she conveys too much edginess, too much strength, if she crosses over into being too much like Louisa, she's no longer Isabella and she's no longer fulfilling her specific role in the family. Everybody really does have a specific role. And if somebody deviates from that role, it kind of messes up the dynamic of the family, or it actually like unravels or reveals the inner dysfunction that the family may be experiencing. So all of these roles are presenting a front. And in a sense, Isabella sort of serves as a metaphorical representation of what the entire family is.
Another person that really exemplifies what's happening in the family is Peppa. Peppa has very little control over her emotions. She wears them on her sleeve. She wears them over her head. She's the person that you look to see what's happening under the surface of every single family member. She's the one that is kind of tasked with the emotional burden to express all of those unsaid feelings that are happening in everyone's minds.
She's the one that can't help but cause chaos because of the power that she's been given. She's the one that cannot help but show the inner turmoil of everybody else around her, because the moment that she gets exasperated by it, the clouds form and the rain comes. And
I would say that Peppa is one of the characters where her gift is so entwined with her personality that if you start to really look into it, you see that every single one of their gifts has to do with her personality. With Peppa, she feels things very strongly and affects others around her through the weather. Julieta's gift is that she heals people through food. And she's a very nurturing person. You can tell that she loves people so much and she wants them to do so well that her gift is heavily entwined with her personality.
Each of the triplets have really highly symbolic gifts.
Yes. So we know that Abuela, she goes through a traumatic experience. She loses her husband. I have a theory that the three triplets each developed a gift that kind of indicated how they dealt with that trauma. Because Peppa is the one who heavily feels, oh, Abuela is sad because, you know, she's thinking about dad. I'm sad about dad. And now everyone's sad because I'm sad.
She kind of embodies the sibling or the child in the family that takes on the emotions of everybody else. Or feeds onto the emotions of everyone else.
Yes. And then we have Julieta, who another response to that kind of trauma would be to, oh, I'm going to save people. I'm going to heal people.
Here, I'm going to give you something that makes you feel better. I'm going to make a difference in people's lives and help them recover. And then Bruno is the one that can see into the future. And he's the one that supposedly was meant to help the family kind of look to the future. But because he started seeing all of the future, and not just the pretty parts of the future, but the parts of the future that people didn't want to hear, he was less accepted of the three. Hence the we don't talk about Bruno situation.
With Bruno, what I see in his gift and why it developed and how he is dealing with the trauma of losing his dad and never having his dad, I see him as like, I'm going to look forward and I'm going to try and move past this. Maybe he's the one that actually successfully moved past it. And that's one of the reasons that he was alienated by the family, because Abuela couldn't move past it. Abuela is headstrong and she's obsessed with making sure that the miracle doesn't die. Yeah. And she loses sight of what the miracle actually is. She thinks it's the magic. But
or the fact that things have to change to maintain the miracle.
Actually, it's the fact that her family's there at all.
He was just trying to protect Mirabelle. And that was why he ended up leaving, because he saw Mirabelle in a vision having to do with the house. And he didn't want all of the blame to fall on little Mirabelle, because she already had the whole debacle with the door and not being given a gift. Bruno is actually a pretty benevolent character that has been painted in a really bad light. And it just kind of goes to show that, like, oftentimes the one who leaves the family, like, that's a
because
that's
he doesn't
a role.
fit into the family anymore. He's
Yeah.
not accepted for one reason or another. In this case, the gift that he had was perceived as not helping the family, but actually just causing chaos.
That points to a bigger issue with a lot of family dynamics when people's roles in the family start to become more valuable than the individual themselves.
Good point.
And I think that happens a lot in a lot of different types of family dynamics, but I think it especially happens in big families or multi-generational houses. And I think that multi-generational homes can be absolutely wonderful, and I think having a big family is great. But I think the more roles that you have to play in the family and the more energy that it takes for the family to function, the easier it is for people to just be defined by their role. People should and do change as they grow, and often change roles in the family as a result. Bruno was telling them things that would actually improve their lives or got to the truth of the issues that were nagging at them in their lives. But they didn't want to hear those things, and it was easy to just blame it on him instead of realize that their habits were or their decisions were what was leading to those predictions being made. They were leading to the events in the future that Bruno was foreseeing, and they also had the power to change those events if they changed their actions. You know, it's never said that any of Bruno's visions were set in stone or that they couldn't change depending on whatever he
people just
warned
assumed
people of.
it's in the song itself. Your fate is sealed when your prophecy is read. But that's not entirely true, as we saw in the vision that made Bruno leave.
I feel like a lot of people don't realize that, like, those visions were probably dependent on the decisions that they themselves were making in the present moment. And so it was really a them thing that was being pointed out, but they wanted to blame it on Bruno because it was more convenient.
I want to talk about Mirabelle. Mirabelle took the place of Bruno's role when Bruno left. Mirabelle was seen as the problem because she didn't have a gift and she was causing all of this chaos. Abuela blatantly said, for some people to contribute, they just have to step aside.
Yeah.
And that was indicative of, you know, you don't really belong here, you're just going to mess things up. Abuela was subconsciously blaming all of the problems that happened to the family on Mirabelle.
Yeah.
Which is exactly what happened to Bruno.
And if you're not going to be self-aware about your own issues, then you need a scapegoat to somehow justify or explain those issues. Yeah. And even though Bruno was trying to protect Mirabelle by leaving, what ended up happening was Mirabelle actually became his replacement.
Yeah.
So it was like whether he stayed or not, the same problem would have existed.
And speaking of replacement, we actually have a theory that Mirabelle is primed to replace the matriarch, Abuela herself, when Abuela passes away.
Yeah.
Because their roles are so similar in the family. They're the kinkeepers. They're the ones that bring people together. And the whole deal of fixing La Casita and the miracle itself was Mirabelle going from person to person, fixing that relationship and strengthening it.
Yeah.
And empowering that person to be a part of the family the way they want it to be, not the way they were expected to be.
Yeah.
It's, in essence, the evolution of that generation that Abuela started, and now it will become Mirabelle's job.
Mirabelle was supposed to be the source of the healing of the generational trauma. Abuela did so much to pick the family up and save the family from one crisis. But what tends to happen is that the person who is dealing with so much trauma from a previous crisis can unwittingly become, not because they're a bad person, but just because of the way that human nature is, they can become the cause unwittingly of the new crisis or the new generation's issues. The moment that Antonio, when he is about to receive his gift and he's super nervous, reaches out for Mirabelle and asks for Mirabelle to walk him toward the staircase, that's the minute that you actually get a clue of what Mirabelle's gift really is. Her and her grandmother's gifts are the same or very, very similar. But her grandmother is blind to that because her grandmother doesn't realize that anybody else can possess a kind of internal family gift instead of an external family gift except for her. Some have special gifts to be there for the community. Those are what we consider the external family gifts. And then there are others who are vital to the internal structure of the family. They basically keep the machine going. And those are internal family gifts, like what Abuela has with the candle. That's why the door lit up at the end when Mirabelle touches the newly made home. That was actually Mirabelle's door. And Mirabelle doesn't have her own separate room, magical room in the house, because the entire house, the defining aspect of Mirabelle's gift. While Grandma is the one that maintains the candle, which is the house's power source, Mirabelle is the house, a representation of La Casita herself.
Abuela, in a sense, is the gift giver because she handles the candle. And if you notice what Mirabelle does with every single person that she's with, that she interacts with, she kind of unlocks a different part of their gift or a different part of them. I also want to say this thing about La Casita. As far as I was able to see, Mirabelle is kind of the only person that really had a relationship with La Casita.
Yeah, like at least a direct one. She was the only one that was directly talking with or communicating with the house. And so it just continues to be this like idea that some people are the instigators of the power within a powerful family dynamic, and some are the protectors of the power. Those other external gifts that impact the community at large and not just the family would not exist. This well-oiled machine of this family that serves as leaders for this community would not exist because their power sources would be gone, which is why when Mirabelle and Abuela were coming against each other and they were having hard times seeing eye to eye, and Abuela was basically blaming Mirabelle for all of the problems, the literal foundation of the house was breaking because the relationship between Mirabelle and Abuela was the foundation to the house. That was their gifts. For example, in my family, we have me, who was very obviously a singer, and my brother, who kind of prides himself on being the really athletic one in the family. My youngest sister is a big horseback rider, and that's like her big thing, but she's also super artistic and has her own kind of defined thing or skill. But my sister Sarah reminded me a lot of Mirabelle, a glue that holds our family together. She's still kind of figuring out what her passions are outside of the family.
Her passions are the family.
Yeah, but her passions to a certain extent are the family.
It's
kind of like Mirabelle.
Bonds.
Yeah, and she's somebody that is really, really intentional about not only fostering deep relationships between each and every one of us and her, but also keeping everybody else's relationships really close. Those roles are just as important as like the quote unquote high achievers.
I do want to touch on what I said earlier in the video about seeing an element of my roots reflected in this. There is a lot of overlap in the Latin American countries because the culture influences itself a lot and influences neighboring countries. There's a lot of cultural exchange happening there.
I'm sure there's diversity and differences, of course.
Oh, yes.
Which we aim to respect.
Coming from Mexican roots, my parents were immigrants that came to this country the hard way. Mexico is not the only country that has immigrants come to the United States, where we're situated right now. It's not the only Latin American country that has people looking for a better life, fleeing whatever it may be, crime, lack of opportunities, just seeking an overall better life for their children. When I saw this movie and I saw the family dynamics and I saw the origin of the miracle, I saw my parents' experience through this movie. And to me, it was really cool to see things that I experienced in my own personal family and that I heard about being treated so legitimately and so respectfully. Hearing all of the music that I grew up with, all of those sounds, there's a lot of Colombian influence in Mexican music and vice versa. But to me, what really struck me is that this movie wasn't about pandering to a certain group. It was a movie fundamentally about family. Mm-hmm. And it was through the lens of the particular trauma that is moving your entire family and losing a family member in the process. It's not uncommon for that to happen when you immigrate to a different country, specifically the United States.
I think having that type of insight from it being like genuinely your family background and you coming from a family of immigrants is a really beautiful insight to add to this film. I also think this is not the case globally. It's very differently perceived in other countries. One of the things that is weird about the US in particular is that I don't think it's any secret that we all have a really weird relationship with race. Not all of us, but like as individuals, but just like the country as a whole because of our history. It can be really easy for the white family, white European family, to become the default experience in media.
And I do relate to a lot of that.
Yeah, and of course you do. And those are still legitimate stories, and those people's stories are still worthy of telling. If those are the only stories that are told, then we run into a problem. And that's what we've been talking about a lot with representation. There's been a lot of conversation about representation in media, especially in recent years. And those conversations should be had. And so I think it's wonderful for us to have movies that have universally relatable human experiences. I think this movie was really wonderful with representing the diversity of what people can look like from
Peppa.
Colombia. When we have the Eurocentric experience as a default through which we try to create universality, that's the issue. And I think we don't just have that with this film. I think it's good for us to have universally relatable topics in films that profile a lot of families, that look a lot of different ways and have a lot of diversity to them, whether that diversity be cultural, ethnic, or some other form of diversity, you know, like such as sexual orientation. I think that's one of the things we also learned with Orfeo and Eurydice when it came to a different kind of diversity, which is sexual orientation diversity. We profiled a same-sex relationship, but a lot of the heterosexual people that watched the show told us that they deeply identified with things that the characters were going through. And it's because we were telling universal human stories. I think it's so wonderful that we're seeing Disney and other companies profiling universal experiences through the lens of non-Eurocentric people too, so that there is all sorts of diversity in this film and in this media.
I think it's fantastic that people that are not necessarily Colombian or of the Latin Americas are resonating with this.
Yeah.
It's universally a human experience. We all have families. And I think that is a great step in the right direction when it comes to helping people of different cultures come together and understand each other. For this particular movie, I would rate it a 10 out of 10.
Yeah.
100% would rewatch again. It has a lot of rewatch value. There's plenty of humor in the background. There's micro jokes happening all the time. With each watch, I feel like I noticed something new about a relationship that I didn't see before. I noticed this other detail, and it's really indicative of the kind of quality that Disney has been able to put into their movies lately, and it's fantastic, the direction they're going in.
This isn't one of those films that is just a hit because it might have catchy music. This is a film that, in our opinion, is a home run from start to finish.
Congratulations! You made it to the ending. Please leave a comment below about how Encanto affected you personally. Press a like on the video to see more content like this. And subscribe to support our channel. It's absolutely free and takes like 2 seconds. Thank you very much. Until we meet again, and see you next time.